Hello and welcome to Unacademy. A very good morning and welcome to our daily Hindu news analysis. So let's start our discussion by first looking at the topics that we are going to discuss. From the Delhi edition of the Hindu, I have chosen 7 important topics for a detailed discussion so that you don't have to go back and read the paper again. But before we start, I have a very important announcement. Unacademy is providing you a flat 20% off on all our IAS courses. I'm told that this offer will end tonight. So if you're interested to enroll for our classes, click on the link provided in the video description and don't forget to enter the code IAS English in order to avail the 20% discount. And if you want the PDF of the session, please join our official Telegram channel by scanning the QR code. We will be sharing the PDF over here after the session ends. So let's get started and look at the first topic. The biggest development yesterday was the visit of Russian President Vladimir Putin to India. As we discussed yesterday, this visit is extremely significant because it comes at a time when Russia is locked in a war with Ukraine and is facing considerable tensions with the Western powers. The Western countries have been placing a lot of pressure on India as well to try and stay away from Russia. So, in a reiteration of India's independent foreign policy, India and Russia have taken forward the relationship during the visit of President Putin. Prime Minister Modi, who gave a grand welcome to the Russian president, has even labeled this relationship as an all weather, time tested partnership. Because throughout the decades, Russia has been a trusted partner for India, be it during India's external wars with Pakistan and China, be it with any global issues that we have faced, especially at the United Nations, or with regard to the modernization of India's armed forces. Russia and previously the USSR, they have always stood with India consistently, and India has that trust based relationship with Russia. In fact, President Putin deserves much of the credit for the relationship that has been nurtured over the last 25 years. Ever since Putin came to power, since 2000, he elevated the relationship with India to a strategic partnership under then Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee. He further solidified the relationship under Prime Minister Manmohan Singh and now under Prime Minister Modi. So PM Modi has thanked Putin for 25 years of partnership and trust and friendship between the two countries. PM Modi has even referred to this relationship as the Dhruvatara, as the North Pole, the pole star, which remains constant, which does not realign itself. So, this reference by the Prime Minister is a symbolic gesture from India that India Russia relations are very stable, it's very constant, that nobody can rupture the India Russia relationship. Because throughout the war in Ukraine, India has ensured that we don't criticize Russia directly. We have never voted against Russia at the United Nations. In fact, India has bypassed all the Western sanctions imposed by US and European Union. And we have been one of the biggest buyers of Russian oil. So this again reiterates our policy of multi-alignment, where we work with all the partners who serve India's interests. India will work with Russia, will work with US as well, will work with Europe as well. It is this unique position that India occupies in global diplomacy. And yesterday you got to see that on display. Now let's discuss the key takeaways of the visit. Because a lot of key agreements were signed, important issues were discussed. In fact, the two leaders even addressed a joint press conference. And let's dissect this one by one. We will talk about India's position on the Ukraine conflict, the economic relations that have been discussed, and new agreements that have been signed. We'll also discuss the nuclear, defense, and the labor migration sectors, along with people to people relations and cultural ties. Let's start with the war in Ukraine. See, as we discussed, India has been caught in between the ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine, with Russia, Ukraine on each side and the West on the other side, trying to pull India in different directions. But thanks to India's independent foreign policy, we have been able to navigate these difficult waters. But one criticism we often face from Western countries is that India is on the side of Russia, especially if you look at Western media, even Western think tanks and Western leaders. They often criticize India by blaming India for siding with Russia. But India has maintained its position that we are not neutral in this conflict, that we are not sitting on the fence. It's not that we are trying to reap benefits or profits from both sides. India has taken a side. India has made a choice that is on the side of peace. From the last 2 years, Prime Minister Modi has been urging Putin to end the conflict in Ukraine by talking to the other side. India has been pushing for talks. India has even projected itself as a potential mediator to try and resolve the disputes and work out an interim arrangement to bring the conflict in Eurasia to an end. So, India has said that we are not neutral in this conflict. It's a reiteration of India's position. It's a message to Western capitals, to Washington, to London, to Brussels, that India is not taking a neutral position. We are not on the side of Russia. We are on the side of peace. But at the same time, we will pursue our national interests. If it benefits India's economy and strategic interests by buying Russian oil, India will do that because we have never followed unilateral sanctions, be it the sanctions by US or European Union, except for one rare exception. We have generally not followed these unilateral sanctions. So India has made its position very clear regarding the war, that we want the war to end. India has sent out this message to Putin as well. You might remember PM Modi directly addressing Putin a few months ago and urging Putin to end the war in Ukraine through peace talks. So India has delivered this message multiple times, and we are even willing to play that role of a mediator to contribute positively to end this conflict as soon as possible. So that again shows the balanced approach that we have taken towards this war and how India plays a responsible role globally while protecting its national interests. Because that is a difficult balance in diplomacy, and we are able to do that with quite ease. Now, coming to the next point, the economic relations. The India Russia economic ties have always been constrained and limited, primarily due to the distance and the lack of connectivity. The large distance and lack of connectivity had always been a hindrance for India Russia trade. Though Russia was a key supplier of arms and weapons, though Russia assisted us with nuclear and space technology, the economic relations had never boomed between the two countries. It was mainly because of the distance and the lack of connectivity. So, if you look at our bilateral trade before 2022, our total trade volume was hardly $10 billion, which is nothing. It's a minuscule amount. That showed the lack of interest for Indian exporters to explore the Russian market, and vice versa. Russian companies, Russian traders were equally not interested in the Indian market. But 2022 and the Ukraine war has changed everything. Now the relationship is on a new path. Believe it or not, today the bilateral trade is almost $68 billion. On an average, it's at least about $65 billion. But this is primarily because of the heavy oil imports by India. Majority of the trade by value that you see here, at least 40 to $45 billion of this trade volume would be because of India's oil imports. So right now the trade is dependent on the oil imports, but India is gradually reducing its oil imports. We are looking to diversify our sources, and at the same time we have pressure from the US, especially Trump's 50% tariffs on India, which includes a 25% penalty on India for trading with Russia. Keeping that in mind, and as well as our long-term energy interests, we are diversifying our oil supplies. So going forward, we might see an impact on the bilateral trade volume. So to protect the trade relationship, the two countries have signed an economic strategic partnership, and they have set a goal that by the end of the decade, they will boost the trade volume to more than $100 billion. In the next 5 years, the goal is to pump the trade volume to more than $100 billion, which would make India Russia trade relationship one of the most important in the world. Now, the question is this number achievable? The experts believe maybe this goal is slightly exaggerated. But however, it will never go back to that previous level of $10 billion. Before 2022, India Russia trade was very dismal. So we will never see that numbers again. So going forward, there will be progress and a significant improvement because there are plenty of opportunities today. The distance is being reduced through better connectivity projects and transport and logistic networks that we are working upon. And this is where the Chennai Vladivostok Maritime Corridor, the Eastern Maritime Link, becomes very, very critical for the ambitions of India and Russia. If you look at the traditional shipping route between India and Russia, it passes through Suez Canal, through the Red Sea and the Mediterranean Sea, which is a very long route. You have to basically circumnavigate across Europe to reach Russia, which is time consuming and costlier as well. Now, India and Russia are working on a shorter route to connect the port city of Chennai with Vladivostok in the Far East region of Russia, in the Siberia region of Russia, creating a shorter and more effective link which will help in improving the trade relationship. And experts have noticed that in the last 2 to 3 years, Indian exporters are showing lot of genuine organic interest in the Russian market. Previously, the governments had to push the private businesses and traders to trade with each other. Now we are seeing a bottom up approach where manufacturers, producers, exporters, and traders, they themselves are showing that interest both in India and Russia to engage both the economies. It is this organic push which is needed from the bottom, because governments might come out with agreements and deals and incentives, but unless and until it trickles down, and unless and until there is that drive amongst the traders to trade with a particular country, you can't really boost the trade relationship. For many decades, for almost 60, 70 years, it is the government of India and Russia which have been pushing for trade. For the first time, we are seeing a reversal of the trend where the traders from the bottom level and the exporters and the producers in both countries are showing interest in each other's markets. Now, this is positive sign for the trade relationship between the two countries. So now with the right push from the governments on both the sides, we can definitely get closer to the target. May not be $100 billion, but definitely 80, $90 billion must be a more realistic estimate. But Prime Minister Modi and Russian President Putin are very confident that India Russia will achieve this target. Apart from that, India Russia have agreed to formalize the trade in national currencies, the rupee ruble arrangement, so that we can reduce our dependency on the US dollar and bypass the dollar dominated systems which are controlled by Western powers, be it the Swift messaging gateway or the cross border transaction networks controlled by Western banks and Western institutions. They are being bypassed by India and Russia, and they are looking to promote the trade in national currencies using the rupee ruble arrangement, which is what we have tried for the oil imports that we have made from Russia. India has tried paying using the rupee ruble arrangement. So now we are putting this into a formal setup where our national payment gateways will be integrated. Our digital payment gateways can be integrated. The interbank messaging systems can be integrated. And even the digital currencies which are being rolled out by the central banks can be integrated, providing for seamless transactions using the rupee ruble arrangement. Eventually, India would like to push the UPI model as well and integrate that with Russia's digital payments, which will make it easier for the traders, the tourists, the students, and the investors to carry out cross border transactions. This will basically insulate India Russia trade from the threat of American and European sanctions, because you can reduce your dependency on the American dollar. So, this was one key outcome. The other important issue discussed was the exploration of the Arctic and the establishment of the Northern Sea route for improved logistics between India and Russia. See, India has always been interested in polar research, both in the North Pole and the South Pole. In fact, even before we became independent, even under the British rule in 1920 itself, India had signed the Svalbard Treaty, which allows for Arctic exploration for scientific purposes. The Svalbard archipelago, it belongs to Norway today. So, under the Svalbard Treaty, there are around 48 countries which are signatory to it. India is one amongst them. The signatories are allowed to take up scientific expeditions and exploration activities in the Arctic as part of the Svalbard Treaty. India has a presence in the Arctic. We have scientific missions in the Arctic region as well. India has set up Himadri, a scientific research station. We have deployed the IND-ARC, an underwater observatory in coordination with Norway. So Russia is also a key partner for furthering our presence in the Arctic. Because see, please understand, the affairs of the Arctic is governed by the members of the Arctic Council. Canada, US, then Russia, then you have the Nordic countries, Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Denmark as well, which are part of the Arctic Council. These are the 8 member states of the Arctic Council. They govern all the affairs of the Arctic. But in the Arctic region today, new sea routes are opening up because the glaciers are melting because of rising temperatures. New shipping routes are opening up, and this has opened up a geopolitical competition. And as you know, the Arctic region is blessed with immense resources, from hydrocarbons to critical minerals, rare earths, and fishery resources as well. So there is an intense competition, a geopolitical race which has broken out, especially between US and Russia. And even China is a major player as far as the Arctic is concerned. Because both India and China are observers to the Arctic Council. Even India is part of the Arctic Council. Of course, not as a member, but as an observer. So, given China's presence and China's military deployments in the region, Russian and American military deployments in the region, India is also looking to step up its presence, and Russia can be the perfect partner for India to open up the Northern Sea route. The Northern Sea route, which will pass through the Bering Strait over here in the Pacific, will create a shorter link from the Eastern Hemisphere to the Western Hemisphere. You can see how this can be a much shorter trade linkage compared to traditional sea routes via the Suez Canal, which, by the way, is a choke point. So we can easily extend the Chennai Vladivostok route and connect that with the Northern Sea route to access Europe and the rest of the Western Hemisphere as well, creating better logistics and trade connectivity. So this was another issue which was discussed. Russia has welcomed India's participation in the Arctic and India's role in establishing the Northern Sea route. Another key topic that was discussed was the nuclear sector, the nuclear energy sector. Russia has always been a key partner for India with regard to nuclear energy. Russia is setting up the Kudankulam nuclear power plant in Tamil Nadu. Russia had a commitment to set up 6 nuclear reactors, but as of now, only 2 of them are operational and they are producing electricity which is connected to the grid. So Russia is yet to set up 4 reactors which are pending. So Russia has made a commitment that it will ensure the completion of the project and it will bring all the remaining 4 nuclear reactors online as soon as possible. And Russia has even signed an agreement to supply the fuel that is required and ensure the full operation of the Kudankulam nuclear power plant. In return, India is promising a second nuclear project for Russia. India has said very soon a site will be allocated to Russia. The designated site would be chosen and it would be assigned to Russia to set up a second nuclear power plant in the country. Whereas Russia has committed to fully complete its obligations under the Kudankulam project. Apart from this, India, which is now focusing on small modular reactors, will be getting support from Russia to realize the ambition of establishing smaller modular nuclear reactors. In this year's budget, the Modi government has been pushing for decentralization of nuclear power production. The idea is to push for more small and modular reactors, and Russia has the technology, the miniaturized nuclear technology. And Russia even has capabilities for offshore floating nuclear plants which can float out in the sea. These are miniature reactors which can generate sufficient power while minimizing the risk of any hazardous event. So Russia has made a commitment to India through an agreement to assist India in small modular reactor technology and offshore nuclear power plant technology. So these were some key outcomes as well. Next, coming to the labor issue. See, Russia faces a critical shortage of workers. Russia is affected by an aging population, low levels of fertility rates, and a lot of people have moved out of the country as well ever since the war broke out. And in general, fertility rates have declined across many countries, and Russia is one of them. So it is staring at a demographic problem as a very serious demographic challenge because of aging population and limited workforce which is available. So Russia needs at least 500,000 workers who are skilled and semi-skilled. And this is where India can step in. This is one resource India has in abundance, the human resource, right? Indians looking for opportunities abroad. So India, Russia have signed a labor migration mobility agreement, a labor mobility agreement, which will facilitate the migration of Indian semi-skilled and skilled workers to meet the requirements of the Russian market. This will help address India's concerns as well. See, India was worried that Indian youth were being tricked and deceived by human traffickers, and they were being recruited into the Russian army to fight against Ukraine. This is a problem we have discussed over the last couple of years. Hundreds of Indian youth were deceived by the middle agents, the middlemen, the human traffickers, and they were enlisted by the Russian army, and some of the Indians were killed or injured as well. India had to struggle with Russia, put a lot of pressure on Russia to bring back the Indian youth. They were finally relieved from their duties, and today most of them have been returned back to India. So, to prevent such crisis from re-emerging, because that clearly shows the desperation of the Indian youth for jobs, for employment, as the opportunities are largely lacking in our own country. So, such migration mobility partnerships with Russia, with Israel, with Taiwan, and with European countries, it can open up numerous opportunities for India's youth. Even with Japan and Australia, we have a similar initiative. The idea is to export India's human resource, provide the world with skilled and semi skilled workforce so that it can become a mutually beneficial partnership and it can also curb illegal migration. If there are legal routes for finding jobs abroad, why will someone take the illegal route? That's the whole idea behind these labor migration and mobility partnership agreements. So, in total, the visit of Russian President Putin was quite successful. There were some key announcements, but in the defense sector, discussions have taken place regarding completion of the S-400 deal because India had placed an order for 5 batteries of S-400 in 2018. It was a $5 billion deal. Russia, as of now, has supplied only three of them. And we saw how effective the S-400 was in providing air defense to India during Operation Sindoor. So the delivery of two more units is pending. Russia has promised to complete the delivery maybe by next year. But the details are not clear because the leaders did not go into the specifics. For obvious reasons, defense deals would be classified to some extent. Then there have been discussions on India procuring the S-500, a more advanced version of the S-400 systems. And there have been discussions on India procuring the Sukhoi 57, the fifth generation fighter jets. So, in the defense sector, of course, there have been deliberations, some new initiatives being considered, but the details are very little and they're not very specific as of now. So, all in all, it was a very productive and fruitful visit, and it again cements the idea that the relationship between India and Russia is a time-tested partnership. It is foolproof. It is turbulence-proof. No matter what happens around the world, there might be some ups and downs, but it can't rock the India-Russia relationship. Nothing can destabilize India-Russia relations. We are like BFFs. That is what PM Modi was also indicating when he called this relationship as the pole star, something that does not change alignment, something that keeps guiding the world, right? So please take up this practice question based on what we have discussed. India's relations with Russia is time tested and turbulence proof. Examine. Now, here you can either focus only on contemporary ties or you can explore the past, the India Soviet relations, at that context, and then talk about contemporary relations. It's up to you how you will approach this particular question, right? So please use the discussion we have had to practice your answer writing. Now, let's move on to the next topic. On page number 8, there is a column on the topic of digital constitutionalism. Very important concept in Indian polity. So, in this discussion, we'll understand what is digital constitutionalism. We will understand why is it in news and what is the need to push for digital constitutionalism. See, recently there was a huge controversy that broke out following a report by Reuters. Reuters broke a story that the Indian government, the Department of Telecom, is mandating the phone manufacturers to pre-install an app the Sanchar Sati app. The government confirmed the reports and it argued that this was for enhancing cybersecurity. Since India is very prone and vulnerable for cyber crimes, Indians are being targeted by cyber criminals. So the government said having the Sanchar Sati app pre-installed on every phone will help in tracking down these offenders. It will help in ensuring cyber safety, protecting the victims, and targeting the cyber fraudsters and the criminals. But however, this proposal from the government generated a huge backlash. Phone manufacturers like Apple, they rejected the idea because, as you know, Apple doesn't believe in installing third party apps during the manufacturing stage, because the government order apparently directed all the companies which are producing phones in India, which are importing them, and even the ones which are already being used for them to be pushed as a software update. So this proposal generated a lot of controversy because it raised the specter of state surveillance, mass surveillance. Because such a app installed on each and every phone would be logging certain data. It would be harvesting certain data, collecting it and transmitting it. It could be your location, it could be some of the features and the settings on your device, right? So any access to government entities, to law enforcement agencies, into your personal electronic devices will constitute a breach of your privacy, a breach of your data privacy, your data security. Of course, the state does have a legitimate right on security grounds, but this is a power which comes with checks and balances. Can't be a blatant power which can be issued to the state, where it can pre-install such apps and use this maybe for possible mass surveillance, which could violate the fundamental rights of the citizens. So eventually, the government it backtracked. There was a lot of pressure from the media, from the civil society, from internet activists, and from the phone manufacturers, especially from giants like Apple, Samsung, and others. Behind the scenes, there would have been a lot of pressure from the phone companies as well that we can't install such apps on phones. So now the government has taken a back step saying it's not mandatory, it will not be pushed as a pre installed app, and you'll have the option to delete it if at all it is pre installed. Now, that aside, the issue aside, this brings up the topic of digital constitutionalism. What is this digital constitutionalism? See, in today's digital world, none of us can escape the harms of data misuse because we have willingly, unwillingly shared a lot of intimate personal data on various platforms, on devices, which might remain permanently as well in the digital realm. In today's algorithm driven world, right, where digital technologies and machines are capable of decision making, it always represents a risk that if this data is misused, it could pose a risk to human rights. It could pose a risk to democracy itself. It could pose a risk to your basic fundamental rights, such as equality, free speech, and expression. It could threaten rule of law. So, whatever the human civilization, the human society has built in liberal democracies, everything can be threatened and even eroded with what's happening in the digital domain today. Technology has become so sophisticated that in an algorithm driven AI world, it's very easy to violate human rights, to crush freedom of speech and expression, to crush dissent, to target criticism, to erase equality, and to erode rule of law. So this threatens your constitutional rights. So today, democracies are under threat, constitutions are under threat, the rights guaranteed through constitutions are under threat. So digital constitutionalism, it's a concept. It's a legal concept, a constitutional concept. It talks about introducing these principles, the constitutional principles in the digital domain, extending the concept of equality to the digital domain, extending the concept of right to free speech and expression to the digital domain. Now, take right to privacy, for example. Now, in India, it's a fundamental right recognized under Article 21 in the historic case Puttaswamy judgment by the Supreme Court in 2017. So, extending this concept of right to privacy into the digital domain would call for protection of data privacy and appropriate laws will have to be drafted for that. Ensuring rule of law is maintained and upheld in the digital space. Ensuring inclusion, principles of equity, and the very spirit of your constitution is followed in the digital space as well. Because in the coming years, for sure, the world will move towards a more digital environment. You're already seeing the transformation happening, the role digital technology plays in our day to day life. But please remember, technology is supposed to serve mankind, not the other way around. But there is a prospect, a very alarming prospect, where technology could become the master of humans, where technology could be possibly used by some humans to dominate over other humans. Because, see, there is an inherent divide, an inherent inequality when it comes to advanced technology, because it is possessed by few countries, few elites, few billionaires, and they will have this unimaginable superpower in their hands to control your fate, to control your future. If you have read the popular novel by George Orwell, 1984, George Orwell was way ahead of his time. He envisioned a future where technology will take over and a big brother state which is constantly watching you, monitoring the citizens. When such an environment is created, right, humans tend to curb their inherent free spirit. Because let's say tomorrow you know that there are cameras watching you. You know that someone is watching your phone, someone is watching what you're doing. Then automatically you will self censor yourself. You will watch what you're speaking, what you're doing, what you're saying. This kind of restriction of basic human rights can be possible through technology. Now, take for example facial recognition technology. Facial recognition is being widely deployed by police and law enforcement and intelligence agencies for security purposes. It's deployed at airports, for example. It's deployed for providing various services from hospitals to schools, etc. But facial recognition is problematic given the bias it can bring in with regard to its application. There have been many cases where people of color, minorities, women, they have been discriminated by facial recognition technologies. So, given the inherent bias that can exist in AI tools, given the hallucination of certain AI algorithms, especially the generative large language models, it is very risky to entrust key decision making powers just to algorithms. There needs to be certain checks and balances. There has to be a measure of necessity, a measure of proportionality. So, whatever doctrines that you find in the constitutional landscape, they should be reflected in the digital landscape as well. Now, you might say, sir, an app like Sanchar Sati would have helped the government to combat cyber crimes. I agree. But what were the checks and balances being proposed by the government? Were there measures being considered by the government to protect the data of the citizens? Were there any provisions to prevent abuse? If, let's say, a law enforcement official misuses the access to data and targets certain individuals, will there be any punitive action taken against those officials? So that was not clear. So the argument of the government is now we have a law to protect data, which is the Digital Personal Data Protection Law. But this law itself is problematic because citizens who are supposed to be the data principals, they are supposed to be accorded with a set of rights to protect their data privacy and their digital protection. But this law provides lot of exemptions to the government. It creates a lot of exemptions to security agencies, police, law enforcement, and intelligence on the grounds of national security. But you might argue, how can we ignore national security? On the grounds of sovereignty, national security, we should be able to compromise on right to free speech and expression. I agree, when security comes into picture, others will issues will take a back seat. But however, there should be checks and balances here. Any violation of your right to free speech and expression, any violation of right to equality, right to privacy, it should be a measured violation. There should be the doctrine of necessity, proportionality applied. Now, for example, let's say there is a terror alert. Does that give the government the authority to mount mass surveillance on all the citizens just because there is one terror alert? Right? It has to be targeted surveillance. If you know who the potential targets are, maybe targeted surveillance could be justified. That too with checks and balances, with accountability. And if at all it is misused, there should be accountability and ensure that the officers responsible are punished. But those provisions are completely missing. We don't have an independent data authority. Under the data protection law, the data protection board would be part of the government, established by the government. The members of the board would be appointed by the government. So when the government itself is under question here, if the board itself is loyal to the government, then how can you expect a fair justice to be delivered? You need an independent, autonomous data protection authority, which was recommended by the Justice B.N. Sri Krishna Committee, which India doesn't have as of now. So the writer is essentially bringing a support cause for he's trying to rally public support for the idea of digital constitutionalism, where constitutional values that you see get reflected in the digital space. The doctrine of necessity, doctrine of proportionality, the fundamental rights of equality, right to free speech and expression, right to privacy, these values that you see in the constitution should be reflected in the digital space. And that is the responsibility of the legislature, the parliament, executive. And it's a responsibility of the society at large to ensure that we push for the inclusion of these values and these rights into the digital space as well. That is the argument being made here. So please take up this practice question based on what we have discussed. Because as I said, technology was always supposed to serve mankind. It can't be the other way around. Technology can't gain that control over humanity. There is that risk which exists, and that's why democracies might be under threat. Human rights could be under threat. Your basic guaranteed rights could be completely violated by those who control these powerful technological tools, right? And that's where the balance needs to be brought in with with the inclusion of digital constitutionalism. Now, moving on to the next article, there's an editorial on page number 8 that refers to an ongoing conflict in Africa. The conflict involving the DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and the neighboring country of Rwanda. There is a raging conflict between these two African nations, and now United States has claimed to have mediated a peace agreement between these two countries. Donald Trump has taken personal credit, as he always does, for mediating the peace deal. The agreement was worked out a few months ago, but on 4th December, the leaders of DRC and Rwanda, they were invited to Washington to sign the peace deal in front of Donald Trump. And as usual, Donald Trump was praising himself. You might have seen yesterday's video where he was awarded the FIFA Peace Prize, and Donald Trump is taking the medal and he's basically awarding himself, right? That shows the inclination of Donald Trump, and he's a self proclaimed peacemaker, right? And he has already taken credit for this peace deal. And he's saying the United States is going to end the conflict between these countries, bring some stability to this part of Africa, and US will play a role to economically develop these countries as well. But the editorial has a different viewpoint. Because the conflict involving Rwanda and the DRC is not a simple conflict. It's a very complex, deep rooted ethnic conflict. And the US has not addressed any of the root causes and the root issues which are there. Yes, there is a temporary halt to the fighting. US has indeed played a role in at least curbing the scale of violence in the last few months, but that's not a guarantee that this peace accord will survive. So to understand this point, you need to look at the history of the conflict in this region. It's one of the most horrific, uh, violent incidents that the world has seen. The entire root cause goes back to the ethnic divide between two tribes, the Hutus and the Tutsis. I'm sure all of you would have heard about the Rwandan genocide in 1994, a horrific genocide where Hutu militias, armed by the state, supported by state entities, they targeted the native ethnic Tutsis, committing a mass slaughter. Almost 8 lakh Tutsis were slaughtered in the Rwandan genocide by the Hutu militias. This was in the country of Rwanda, located over here. So, following the Rwandan genocide, eventually it led to a civil war, and the Hutu militias and that regime was finally thrown out, and the Tutsis managed to capture power and they formed the government, bringing the genocide to an end. So, as the Tutsis came to power following their genocide, the Hutu militias, which had now been disbanded, they fled to the neighboring country of Democratic Republic of Congo. They found shelter in the neighboring country of DRC. So Hutus, They took flight from Rwanda because obviously the Tutsis would have targeted them. The Tutsis came to power after the genocide. They would have extracted their revenge. So Hutus fled the country and they were sheltered in DRC. Then something happened. The Hutu militias who had fled to DRC, they enjoyed the state support of the government in DRC. The Hutu militias and DRC have always maintained a close bond, a close relationship. So the Tutsi government in Rwanda, in order to safeguard its interests and protect the Tutsis, because see, in DRC, there are Tutsis who are in minority. So Rwanda was now fearing that with the backing of the DRC, the Hutu militias might now slaughter the Tutsi minority in the neighboring country. So Rwanda started sponsoring a rebel group known as the M23 to target the DRC. So it's essentially a proxy war between the two neighbors, with each country sponsoring a set of militias against the other. The DRC sheltering Hutu militias such as the FDLR, which target Rwanda and the Tutsi community. On the other side, the Tutsi dominated government in Rwanda sponsoring the M23 rebels, mainly made up of Tutsis, to protect the Tutsi minority in Congo and to target the Hutu militias and the government of DRC. This has been the proxy war which has been raging. In 2012, when M23 was formed, they very quickly captured important cities in Congo. The entire Goma region in eastern Congo was captured by them. But following international pressure on Rwanda, Rwanda had to scale down the support to M23 rebels, and M23 had retreated from the DRC, and the conflict had subdued. But in 2021, the conflict has resumed, and over the last 4 years, intense fighting has broken out between M23 rebels and DRC, which has spread across eastern and other parts of the DRC. Recently, they have captured North Kivu and even some cities and towns in South Kivu as well. And they've taken the entire Goma region. So DRC has lost significant territory to the M23 rebels who are allegedly sponsored by the neighboring country of Rwanda. So this has been the ongoing conflict. So with the involvement of United States, a tentative peace has been worked out where both sides have been convinced by the US to disarm these militias, to stop sponsoring these non state actors. So a ceasefire is being called and a commitment from both countries to respect each other's territorial integrity and sovereignty, stop supporting these armed groups, and bring the violence to an end. And in return, the US is promising economic prosperity for both countries. Now, don't think US is being selfless. US has a selfish motive here, a self-interest to serve, because both the countries are blessed with natural resources. Especially the DRC is blessed with critical minerals, including lithium and cobalt. It has one of the largest reserves of lithium and cobalt known. Rwanda also is blessed with immense natural wealth and resources. So American corporations are now eyeing the resources of these two countries. Trump has openly spoken about bringing American investments to these countries, which can profit both the sides and in turn profit the American interests as well. Of course, Russia also has played a role. Russian private militias have participated in this conflict on the side of the DRC, the private mercenary force of Russia, the Wagner Group, which has now transformed into a different entity, was known to be involved in the conflict on the fighting on the side of the DRC against the M23 rebels. So through such involvement, Russia also had gained access to the lithium mines in DRC. So you can see that larger geopolitical game, a sort of covert game going on between big powers to exploit the resources in poor African nations. That explains the motive behind the conflict as well. So there are deep-rooted ethnic issues dating back to the Rwandan genocide. Plus, there are these complex economic and governance related issues where justice was never delivered to the Tutsis in Rwanda, to the communities affected in Congo. So, without resolving these ground problems, these root problems, a simple peace accord signed in Washington amongst the leaders will not bring about the transformation which is needed. That's why the editorial is of the opinion that this peace may not last. In the past as well, many such agreements have been signed, but they have fallen apart within days, within months, and fresh fighting would have resumed. So history suggests that this peace is unlikely to hold. Just bringing money and investments into the region is not going to solve the unaddressed problems. If you don't resolve the inter-ethnic, inter-tribal issues which are present between the Hutus and the Tutsis, if you don't make permanent peace between the regimes in DRC and Rwanda, this conflict is never going to end. That is something the US doesn't realize. And Trump believes that quick fix solutions can work. Band-aid like solutions can work for a deep wound. So editorial is cautioning Africa and the region and the world that this conflict is nowhere near seeing its peaceful end. So that is something we learn from this editorial. I've included all the key points, the summary over here. You can please go through this later. Now, coming to the next topic. On the front page, there's an article that refers to a new push by the government of India to improve its communication, to improve its public relations with the citizens, with the media, with the global audience, which means that the government is paying more attention to managing the narrative, be it promoting the achievements of the government, conveying the benefits of a government scheme, or pushing India's voice at the global level. Narrative management has become extremely critical in today's digital and connected world. We saw the downside of India's weak narrative management during Operation Sindoor. How quickly India lost the global narrative, where Pakistan ran away with the narrative, which was largely picked up and nurtured by Western media as well, with probable Chinese backing. And they gave a push for the Pakistani narrative, whereas the Indian narrative was largely subdued at the global level, almost projecting that Pakistan had an upper hand over India during the conflict. So this has led the government to have a rethink on its communication strategy, its media engagement approach. And now it is proposing a complete revamp of the communication framework. It is looking to streamline the government's PR with the media, with the global audience, and with regard to uh, the domestic audience as well. So, as part of this reform, the government is looking to restructure the Indian Information Service, the IIS. And this is very good news, happy news for all the IAS aspirants, because recruitment for IIS is through UPSC Civil Services exam. And the government is looking to increase the intake in the coming years significantly, which means more vacancies will open up in the UPSC CSE exams for Indian Information Service officers. It's actually a very unique role in the government. See, last restructuring happened in 2016. The restructuring of this cadre, which is the IIS cadre, happened in 2016. They come under the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting, the INB ministry. So this entire cadre is now being repurposed and restructured again, and the size of the IAS cadre will undergo a significant increase. The government might even look to double the intake, meaning there would be new vacancies which will open up in the UPSC CSE exams. The government is looking at deploying some of the seasoned IAS officers in Indian embassies across the world, giving them foreign postings so that they can shape the global narrative, engage with the media across the world in real time, and respond to emerging trends. So, this will leverage technology as well and people skills to reframe the government's approach towards communication. It is going to completely restructure the communication strategy of the government itself. The government is also looking to set up a board on media communication, which will handle the transfer and posting of the officers of the Indian Information Service. Their training would be further revamped with better modules and better exposure. So until now, IAS postings were limited within India, but now the government is opening up foreign postings. That's what makes IAS a very lucrative service for civil services aspirants. If the intake increases, along with a good career progression plan with good promotions, good transfers, and good foreign postings, this can become one of the most lucrative service in the coming years. Because see, today's era is all about narrative management. And this role would be critical for the government as well in the coming years. So this is one big development which is reported in today's paper. Coming to the last topic, the chaos, the mess being seen across Indian airports, the mishandling by Indigo, the almost criminal blunders that Indigo has committed which has led to complete chaos in India's civil aviation. Hundreds and hundreds of flights have been cancelled. For example, at Delhi airport yesterday, all Indigo domestic flights were cancelled. Hundreds of flights in Bengaluru, Mumbai, and all major airports. It has led to complete disruption of civil aviation. As flights have been grounded, lakhs of passengers have been stranded. Flight prices have skyrocketed. A regular flight ticket from Bengaluru to Delhi, which would cost maybe 7 to 10,000, is now at 70,000 rupees. People are missing key events. They are uh, they are forced to change their plans, suffer financial losses, and at the last minute, these changes which are being done by Indigo is entirely a result of mismanagement. So why is this happening? What's the root cause? See, the DGCA, the Directorate General of Civil Aviation, the regulator of the civil aviation sector, had brought out a new set of roster rules known as FDTL, flight duty time limitations. This was brought out to manage the workload of pilots and the crew members, to limit their strain and stress, to give them enough rest, give them enough breaks, so that they can also recuperate and function at their optimal level, which is essential to ensure the safety of flights. So, this is a safety measure. To improve aviation safety standards, DGCA mandated new rostering rules under which the work hours, the workload on pilots and crew members was drastically reduced. Mandatory week offs were provided. The night shifts were changed. Night landings for these planes were changed. Previously, up to 6 night landings were allowed. Now it is capped at only 2. These changes that have been done in the rostering system has led Indigo incapable of dealing with the new roster because it simply doesn't have enough pilots, enough crew to manage the new roster. And as a result, when the rules came into effect from November onwards, Indigo had been struggling to keep up with the new rules. And now the system has completely collapsed. The impact is massive because almost more than 60% of our passenger traffic, the domestic passenger traffic, is handled by Indigo. It is clearly the largest domestic airline in our country. That's why the cascading effect. So that's where experts warn against the creation of such monopolies in critical sectors. Indigo almost had a sort of a monopoly. You don't have any other major significant player. And as a result, maybe Indigo took it in a very complacent manner because DGCA had given enough time to Indigo. Several months were there for Indigo to prepare, to recruit new pilots, new crew members. In fact, it was implemented in phases over the last 1 year, and yet Indigo has failed to adapt to the new rules. This is where the problem lies. Indigo has 2,300 plus flights in a given day, domestic flights, and it couldn't manage the roster because it didn't have enough pilots and crew to satisfy the new rules laid down by DGCA. So, because of the chaos that was created, yesterday DGCA has given a temporary relaxation on the rules. For another 2 months, all the rules will not apply to Indigo, which is an exemption being made. Imagine a rule was made and now it is being broken just for Indigo because Indigo failed to meet the guidelines. This highlights the fragility of our aviation space, the civil aviation sector. The fault lies with the government and the regulator as well, not just with Indigo, because there are pressing problems in our aviation industry which have to be addressed on a war footing. Or else, this will have a cascading effect. In a country with such ambition, a country which is looking to become a developed nation, you can't have such crisis coming up where the complete aviation traffic goes down and there is a complete disruption of air travel. Minor hiccups are expected, but this is complete collapse of civil aviation itself in the country. And as I said, Indigo is the one to be primarily blamed as it did not prepare for these new rules. Now they made up excuses, they apologize, they're giving refunds. But what's the point? The damage is already done. And now the government and the regulator, they are adjusting. The regulator is making adjustments, giving a relaxation to Indigo. Right? This is inexcusable. This is where accountability has to be ensured. And that's why it's important to have a secondary player, a secondary or a third key player in the market. When you have a monopoly or duopoly, it's always bad for the customer because nobody cares what happens to the consumer at the end of the day. Right? That's why such monopolies where one large company dominates the sector is always bad news for the sector. Coming to the prelim section, a quick update on a couple of topics. The Monetary Policy Committee of the RBI has taken stock of the macroeconomic conditions. It has taken a look at the inflation level, at the growth prospects, and it has decided to continue with its neutral stance, meaning it's ready to support growth if necessary. At the same time, it is ready to curb inflation if necessary. And as part of this approach, it has decided to cut repo rate, which is the primary monetary policy tool of the RBI, by 25 basis points, which brings the current repo rate to 5.25%. Now, this is very good news for the markets, for borrowers. This will reduce your interest rates. This is a signal by RBI that right now it is looking to boost growth. Since it is taking a neutral stance, it is looking to boost growth for the time being, because there is something amazing which has happened with regard to India's inflation levels. Inflation has fallen and it has gone below the lower threshold which is set for the Monetary Policy Committee. See, when the MPC was set up, right, it was given an inflation target of 4%, which is the ideal inflation to have to boost growth and manage liquidity and ensure that macroeconomic stability is ensured. But a range was given to the Monetary Policy Committee that was plus or minus 2%, meaning the least inflation should be 2%, maximum inflation should be 6%. So the job of MPC of RBI is to manage inflation within the band from 2 to 6% with the ideal target of 4%. Since the establishment of Monetary Policy Committee, we had never crossed the lower threshold. Never ever inflation had gone below 2%, but it has happened in Q2 of the fiscal. Inflation has gone down to around 1.7% for the second quarter. In October, initial data is indicating that inflation is down to 0.3%. So now that inflationary trends are largely managed because the food prices have been stable due to bumper crops and supply chain constraints have been eased. So there is not likely to be an inflationary pressure. Hence, the RBI has chosen to boost growth and support growth by cutting the repo rate. Repo rate is the primary monetary policy tool of the RBI, right? It is the rate at which RBI lends to the banks, essentially. These rates are eventually passed down to the consumers. So by cutting repo rate, RBI is looking to boost growth because in the coming months, though growth is at decent levels now, it is expected to face some challenges in the coming months. Growth has in the range of 8.2%. Real GDP growth is estimated at 8.2% for the second quarter of the fiscal. But in the third, fourth quarters, there are some slowdowns expected in growth. That's why RBI is looking to cut the repo rate and boost growth for the time being. And if necessary, it will later tackle inflationary threats. But as of now, the threats from inflation is almost non-existent. In fact, inflation should come back to 2% and above, because anything below that could indicate a potential deflationary trend, but that's unlikely to happen. So RBI is just putting its stance on neutral mode so that it can boost growth for now. There is room available for bringing some inflation back to keep it above 2%. And once it comes back to the 4% range, then RBI would again go back on the repo rate. Next, there's another article related to the RBI. RBI has announced open market operations to buy government securities to the tune of 1 lakh crore rupees in this month to manage liquidity in the market. The RBI is expecting some liquidity constraints, so it is resorting to another tool, open market operations, where it will be purchasing GSECs or government securities to the tune of 1 lakh crores to infuse that liquidity into the market. Along with that, it is also employing a dollar rupee swap, again to manage the liquidity. This is not to protect the rupee. The rupee, which has dropped below 90 per dollar, has raised some concern that Indian rupee has depreciated. It has become one of the weakest currencies in Asia. But as I said yesterday, a depreciation is not necessarily a bad news. RBI is very confident about the long-term prospects of the economy. The RBI would intervene in the forex market and protect the exchange rate only if it was very volatile fluctuations or sudden emergency kind of fluctuations that were happening. But that's not what is happening with the rupee right now. RBI has allowed the market to determine the rupee dollar exchange rate because it is confident that it will bounce back sometime. It's not a sudden volatile shift which is happening. So usually RBI does carry out such intervention to protect the rupee. It will sell some dollars. But now it's not doing that. It doesn't want to waste that firepower. It knows the market will correct itself. So RBI is employing a dollar rupee swap to introduce some fresh liquidity into the forex markets, but it is confident about the position of the rupee and as well as about the forex situation. We are in a very comfortable position. So RBI has reassured the markets that there is nothing to worry about the depreciating rupee. It may have hit its lowest, but these fluctuations are normal. It was expected. It was in line with what RBI had predicted. So it's not out of normal. If it was out of normal, then RBI would have stepped in to protect the rupee from further fall. But now it's not doing that. It's allowing the market forces to take over, which I think is the right policy to do. So, with this, I bring my discussion to an end. I hope you guys have understood all the topics. If you like the discussion, do press the like button, share your comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. That's it. Thanks for watching.